home is for you. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And I guess that's just to wrap up is, just, that right where we are, and I put my hand on my heart, it's just that this little body that we have is our home base for while we're here on the planet, and that we can be friends with our body, and we can be friends with ourselves, and that from that space of being in that friendship with ourselves and recognizing the oneness of all of us, because we talk, about our body and our emotions and our mind as if it's all separate, but it's
right.
all unified. And that when we're really in that space of us, then everything is possible, and we can really connect with each other in the way that we all so long for that.
Yeah.
It's one of the most basic and primal requirements to feeling good here.
Yeah. Tell us about the medicine wheel. What was it that really drew you into that? And then what did you learn about yourself through that whole process? Because, I mean, I've heard of a medicine wheel. I've seen a picture of a medicine wheel, but I really have no clue what does that mean, in terms of a healing tool or, anything like that.
Or what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing is just the words themselves, and seeing that picture of the circle.
Yeah.
And the wholeness of the circle, and it just, I couldn't even tell you in the moment that I read it exactly what it was. But as I've gone along and learned about it, ironically, like I mentioned earlier, that my mom was Lakota, and the Lakota are one of the nations of people that have the medicine wheel as a really important part of the culture. Mm-hmm. I was never connected at all with my Lakota relatives, and I still haven't found them to this day. But there's something, our being just knows something, and it was like I knew that this was my thing. And I've also learned that the Cree people and the Anishinaabe people, or they would say Ojibwe down in the States, or Chippewa, are connected with the medicine wheel, and each nation has their own teachings about it. But mm-hmm. interestingly enough, there's no phrase in any of the nations that I've connected with that has the phrase medicine wheel. And if you think about it, we didn't have wheels; we had circles.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we called it, like the translation was a hoop, the sacred hoop in Lakota. But when, you can imagine these, European stock people coming across this great big circular thing out in the middle of nowhere, or what they would call nowhere, and go, look, it's a wheel, because it had spokes in it and all of that. And then, and they talk about medicine, medicine this and medicine that. So we'll call it a medicine wheel. So, kind of makes sense. But, and so there's lots of different teachings, and I personally do not teach any culturally specific information about the medicine wheel, because that's really best left to the elders of all of those various nations. And each person whom I've ever heard teach about it, even if they're from the same nation, they always teach something a little bit different. But there's some basic principles, and those principles. And I've had the great pleasure and blessing of being able to travel throughout, what we call Indian country, or Turtle Island, Indian country and Turtle Island. So a lot up in Canada with the Aboriginal and First Nations and even the Inuit people. But all of the principles are similar, of respect and gratitude and working together for the common good and self-respect, all of those kinds of things. And so it's like a mnemonic, the medicine wheel can be, and it represents so many things. And so there's all of that. But for me, when I think about it, in relation to, because I spent 12 years immersed in Catholicism, it's a very hierarchical system. You've kind of got God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit up at the top, and then you've got the saints or the apostles, Jesus's posse, and then in Mary, Joseph,
I love it.
and then, and then you've got like the the archangels and the angels, and then the little cherubim and seraphim all floating around and doing their cute thing. And then you've got the really, really high saints who did lots of miracles. And then you've got the medium saints who did a few. And then you've got the three who only did their requisite, or the ones who only did their requisite three. And then you've got the really, really good people who were good but weren't good enough to be saints. Then you've got the medium good people, and then you've got the good people, and then you've got the people who are in heaven only because we prayed it hard enough for them to get them out of purgatory, so they made it in. And then you come to the earth, and you've got the Pope, and then you've got the College of Cardinals who vote the Pope in, and then you've got the archbishops, and you see what I mean? It's like
You've done too much. You've thought about this way too much.
Yeah.
No, but it's like I mean, and you look at the world. Though. It's like it's out there, and then you look at the medicine wheel, and there's this circle, and my teacher talked about how the point at the center represents the creator, or the everywhere spirit, or all that is, or whatever you want to say, and if it's a perfect circle, then every point on the circumference of that circle is going to be equidistant, the same distance to the center, and to me it's like, oh. You mean the Pope's just as close to the center as I am?
Not any closer to God than anybody else is.
And than anybody else. And I don't have to go through the Pope to get to the Creator, or through anybody else. It's each of us have this direct connection. And so my teacher taught us how to sit. We would sit on the desert floor. We'd make the medicine wheel, and then we'd sit around it, and we would journey to the center. And so nowadays people would call that shamanic journeying, and you go from where your stone is straight in, and then she would guide us through particular journeys that we would do. And it was wonderful, and it was profound. And then after a little while, she looked at me one day and she said, well, it's so good that you're feeling better using all of these things I've been teaching you. And I said, yes, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much. And she said, and so now that you know about it, now it's your turn to share it with other people. And I'm like, oh, no. I mean, you guys, you're hearing me speak more right now than you would have heard me speak in a month. Like, I did not talk in front of other people. I might, chat around with my friends, but to get up and talk in front of other people, or to think I was being recorded, and it was just like, that's just not going to happen. And my teacher I said, no, grandmother, I can't do that. I don't talk in front of people. And she just kind of gave me this look like, did I ask you? I was like, oh snap, because I love her so much. I just had to say yes. And then the whole time I'm like, oh, nobody's going to come. And then when they come, I'm like, well, they're not going to like it. Well, when they liked it, it was like, oh no. And so but she got me to keep going. And the thing about it is, it's her point of view is that traditions are the foundation upon which we build. It's not just some static thing that has to be sacrosanct and we never deviate from. It's like a recipe. Like your grandmother may have the best recipe in the world, but maybe nowadays you wouldn't use 2 cups of sugar in that. You might use 1 cup of sugar, or half a cup of sugar, based on the things we know about
sugar,
wellness and stuff. So, we're always adapting and adjusting. And so that was her point of view. And then also, which I adopted, but also that the medicine wheel itself, it's alive. It's alive and dynamically alive, and that you can, literally ask a question of the medicine wheel and receive a response. And I would go personally and ask, because, we would set up huge ones that 500 people could be around. And then I have my own personal one that I would set up on a little altar in my own home. And if I would be having one of those meltdown moments, or a frustrating moment, or whatever, I could go to the medicine wheel and say, look, please help me, show me something here, because I'm kind of having a meltdown or something. And I would always receive a response. So, for instance, I had finally gotten myself into therapy because I mentioned dealing with some abuse issues from childhood and abandonment and yada yada. Anyway, so I get in there, and I have a great therapist, and we're getting through some important things. I'm being diligent with my work, and I'm feeling like, okay, yeah, I'm doing it, getting somewhere, and yay. And then after a little while, I'm walking down the street one day, and it was like, boom, it was all back with me. And I just went, oh my God, so I went beeline to my medicine wheel, and I said, you've got to show me something here, because I feel like I've just been, just whacked over. I want to give up if this is how it's going to be. I've been working so diligently. And then the medicine wheel showed me that, we see it on a one-dimensional plane as a flat thing. But they said you can also look at it this way and see it as a spiral. So where you're at right now and what you're working on right now, by the time you get back around to where you were, you're going to be at a different place with it. You're going to be beyond that. And so, yes, you're dealing with this again, but it's not from the same space that you were in before. And I went, oh, thank you.
So can you say a little bit more about that? Like because when you were in therapy, you were dealing with it in that moment, in that environment, in that mindset. Mm-hmm. How did it change when it came back around? Even though it was there, what was different about it, and how did you handle it from that perspective?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I think even more than how did I deal with it or whatever, in those moments, it was the medicine wheel just reassuring me that I was still going along in a good way, and that I wasn't.
You weren't just going round and round and round.
Yeah, or that I was even going backwards. I mean, that was the thing, or that I was, I don't know, that I wasn't doing anything effective. But when I saw it from the perspective of, okay, this is from, I am working on it, and I don't quite see in this moment how it's different, but even being given that information, I can sense it in myself that, yes, it's different somehow. And so I continue to ask questions of the medicine wheel. And it wasn't so much that I was going, because it's kind of hard to say, but it's like if you go to, it's like when you use, say, like the Sri Yantra or one of those, mandalas, like from India, mm-hmm. You're looking outside of yourself at the center of this thing outside of yourself, but it's really assisting you to go back inside of you. Mm-hmm. So even though I'm talking about going to the medicine wheel and asking the medicine wheel, it was really about the medicine wheel helping me get back in touch with me and with the wisdom that resides within, and that, that we all have and comes from the universe. So basically this is a way of reconnecting with the universal wisdom within yourself, that we've all been trained to think, no, you're not that. I mean, I used to go, well, how come it was only like 5,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago that they had miracles, or that people could prophesy, or that people had visions? Like, well, what's with that? Because even Jesus said, when, the things that I do are nothing compared to what you're going to do when you remember who you really are.
Amazing, isn't it?
I know. So
somebody lied.
Say that again.
Somebody lied.
No, they wouldn't do that.
I'm just saying.
Okay. Yeah.
and going back to what you were talking earlier about the saints.
Yeah.
What the hell happened to Saint Christopher? I never could figure it out.
Who is he?
Who is he?
Not Catholic. I don't know.
Oh, God. Saint Christopher medals and all that?
Oh.
Remember?
Is he the patron saint of like cops or something? Or is that somebody else?
Something.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Patron saint was fun, but then they took it away from him.
Oh.
You didn't know that?
No.
Oh, yeah. He was desainted.
Oh, I'm shocked.
I know.
Anyway.
So let me ask you a follow-up question to what you just explained about where you were, and then you had that therapy experience, and then you had a different experience with seeing it from a different perspective in relation to the medicine wheel. Was it almost like, because I've been in therapy, and Janet, you've probably been in therapy, but I don't know, maybe not. You can speak for yourself. But when you're in that, and you're in that whole drama and that whole story about what took place, it's very real.
Mm-hmm.
It feels that way.
Yeah.
But when you saw it from a different perspective, and you went to the medicine wheel to ask, was it more of being the observer at that point? Or was it really, did it have that same charge and that same energy when you first experienced it when you were in therapy?
Right. Well, I was really fortunate because the therapist that I ended up with was very body-centered. And so after she got me to tell my story, the first, and it took 2 sessions, she said, no, take your time. So we got to go into a lot of detail. And it was really, and it was such a gift to have that, because it was the first time that I really spoke aloud all of these really crappy things that I've been holding inside for so long, and holding them as proof of my badness or wrongness. And just to have somebody compassionately and lovingly listen to that and, you know, literally cry, you know, just listening to what I went through, and acknowledge me for choosing to be not what you might expect, having gone through some of those things. Sure. She then proceeded to get me to be in my body and to get stuff out of my body. So, you know, through physically moving and breath work and those sorts of things. So I didn't use, like, you know, like more of the medical model of psychotherapy. And it was like, if I would bring up an issue about the story, it was more of a jumping off point into something else rather than going in and digging and, you know, digging through the crap all the time. So she was a really great role model for me around that. And because I don't see continuing, and I've done a lot of work over the years, like especially with First Nations people and Aboriginal people up in Canada. There's this whole thing that many North Americans don't know. Both the Canadian and the United States government ripped Native children out of the arms of their families and stole them away and deposited them in these so-called schools where they, you know, suffered just the separation. If you can imagine, even being 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, being torn away from your family and never knowing if you'd ever see them again. And then just mostly being treated horribly in a lot of different ways. So working with survivors of that and being with them, you know, again, being able to witness someone as the first time they're telling their story. And I mean, just reach right in there and rip your heart out. I mean, it just like it was just horrendous. And so for some people, they were able to tell the story and move beyond it. But other people had gotten caught up in the telling the story and telling the story and telling the story as a way of re-triggering that trauma and drama. And kind of, you know, there's like an addiction to that. I appreciate
it becomes their identity.
Yes.
Because without that, they would have no identity because they're so tied to that.
Well, and it's not just those people. It's like, you know, people all over, you know, absolutely. Just like so many things. But what I've seen is that when we're willing, so one of the analogies that I've used over the years is how, for instance, if we were all in the same room together and then we went for a walk to go see the horse and then we came back and somebody snuck in while we were gone and they left this huge, huge steaming pile of fresh horse poo right in the middle of the room, it would be like, oh my gosh, what is that? And what do we do with it? And I don't know. And it's really awful. And I didn't do it and you didn't do it. And what do we do? And, you know, but if we didn't take it out, or if we didn't know how to take it out, it would just sit there. And over time it would dry and it would still be there. And then it would kind of like make dust particles and would get all over everything and kind of be everywhere, you know? And so how many of us have had this big pile of horse poo, as it were, dumped inside our space? And then we don't really know what to do. Like as a child, you just survive. You go along to get along, and you do what you can.
Yep.
And then hopefully you survive long enough to be able to become aware of what you can do to get that horse poop out onto the earth where it belongs. Because when you take it where it belongs, you can make compost with it and a beautiful garden. But otherwise, it just continues to stay in there and fester and ferment and create more dis-ease and more upset and block us from the beauty of what this life on this planet can truly be.
Mm-hmm.
So, I love to garden, and so I get right in there with the horse poo, but I don't bring it in the house,
Great analogy.
Yeah.